All right, so we are
Okay.
joined from Belleville, Illinois, by my friend Miracle Mays, licensed pilot, soon to be commercial license, going to be a
Mhm.
flying all over the place. You know, one of less than 1% of pilots in the United States are black females, and she is one of them. So we thank you so much for joining us. We're in the Transportation, Distribution, and Logistics Career Cluster. I've got a room full here with me at Velma Jackson High School, and we're recording this for our friends at Rosa Scott, Madison Central, Ridgeland High School, Germantown High School, the Academic Options Center, and our YouTube channel. So thank you, as always, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. I'm glad to be here.
Before we get into all the stuff in aviation, you know, you have an interesting background because you're there, and Belleville, Illinois is in the St. Louis area, right across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. But you opted after high school to
Mhm.
not go to college, which
Mhm.
is a different route because you were very sure of your career path. So take us through, you know, those decisions that you made to not do the traditional college route and go ahead and become a professional pilot.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked too, because it's like you said, it's a very uncommon route, especially for this field too. But for me, even before I graduated school, I knew I wanted to fly since I was 10. So from the very beginning, that's what I had been working towards. And the more I talked with pilots, did research, connected with people, like whenever I would fly commercial, I would always like chase the pilots down and ask them questions. And I think every pilot that I spoke to commercially, all of them said, don't. And so I asked them, I was like, well, why is that? Why wouldn't you advise someone to go get a degree in aviation? And the advice that all of them gave me is aviation doesn't require a degree. All that you need is experience and hours. And with a lot of college programs, people end up getting like really shorted on the amount of time that they actually graduate with and the amount of license that they leave school having. Another reason that a lot of pilots advised against it. Now, that one didn't apply as much to me because I've never been the kind of person to have backup plans. My plan is this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to work hard to succeed. I don't need a backup. Now, a lot of people would want to have a fallback, which makes sense, especially with the economy and the way that businesses and it can fluctuate so much. But with aviation specifically, it's only trending in the direction of there's jobs available. There's so many different ways to be a pilot, a lot more than people think. Like just like there's so many other options, and so getting a job really isn't that difficult because there is always a shortage, and I feel like it just keeps growing. So for me personally, I just knew it was like I just want to get in and get out and get done. And if I can get done in 9 months, what most people are doing in 4 years, I'm going to do that. So mine was
Wow.
really about pace and only wanting to pay for what I actually needed. So
Yeah, and we do have some aviation college programs here in Mississippi, the community college and the university level that do cover the first parts of the licensing. Now, with the licensing, a lot of people may not understand.
yeah.
It's not just I have a private pilot's license, I can get behind in the cockpit of a jetliner. That's just the first step. So take us through the process. There's the private pilot license, then there's
Right.
the instrument rating, then there's the multi-engine license, and that's just off the top of my head. So
Mm-hmm.
so take us through the different levels of licensing
Mm-hmm.
that someone would need to
Yeah.
become whether it's for a commercial airline or for a shipping airline or for a charter company or any type of private company. So I know there are several steps. So take us through that because I think most of our young people really aren't familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a lot of things that go into it outside of just the one private pilot get. That is the foundation. That's the building block that gives you all the general basis knowledge that you need. With that, though, there are limitations because you can't fly in bad weather. You have to be able to see the weather needs to be additional, like carrying passengers and things limitations. But private pilot is the basis of everything. And then from there, you can go one of two ways. Most people will do their instrument rating next. That's where it gets fun. Instrument was my favorite. That's where you get to fly in clouds. Your weather limitations are different, so and so that one is usually what people do second, but you can also do your commercial license. Now, this one I'll clear up because a lot of people hear commercial and they think, oh, airlines. No, the commercial license is just what you need to be able to legally get paid to fly. So you can't
Wow.
get a
Okay. I
job
did not know
without your
that.
commercial license. So that's really the first step in getting a job, like that one right there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so usually people do instrument and then commercial because commercial you need to have at least 250 hours of experience. So they build their time doing their instrument license, and then by the time they finish, they only have a little bit more to go get the commercial license. So that's why people
Okay.
usually do it that way. Then from there are a few different routes you can take. So most people, let me back up. To get a job at an airline, you need to have at least 1,500 hours of experience. The most popular and the fastest way for people to build up to that time is to become a flight instructor. So usually after doing their commercial license, people will get their instructor license. That's okay.
All right. So
So
you were talking about the flight
yes, so
instructor and all
usually
that.
people go the instructor route. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So people do the instructor, and then sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But in order to teach people certified flight instructor instrument or CFII, as we call it, that's what people normally do there. So they build teaching other people how to fly, and then they move on to they're able to go straight to. So that's usually what people do. And then there's the multi-engine rating, which for me specifically, I did my multi-engine earlier than most people normally do. Usually people have already started instructing, and then right before they go to get a job or start applying for a job, they'll get that rating added on. And then they'll have that multi-engine time that they'll need to fly corporate or commercial.
Awesome. Now, also, I think it's important to talk about if people are like, I'm into the airplanes, but I don't really want to be in the cockpit. There's a lot of jobs that touch the airplane that are not flying. There are always a need for mechanics. There's always a need for engineers, for air traffic controllers,
Yeah.
for and then on the commercial side, there's a big need for flight attendants, for baggage handlers, for the people on the runway. So talk about some of those other careers that is always a big need for as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Where people hear aviation, they think I couldn't be a pilot. There are so many other ways to be involved in the industry outside of that. Like you said, controllers is an incredibly important job. We could not do what we do without them. They're amazing, really good at like task management. And there are a lot of towers. So I would even encourage you, if there's an airport nearby, a lot of towers you can do tours just to get a peek behind the glass of like what is really happening inside the tower and the different controllers. It's really amazing all that they do. Like you said, ramp handlers, baggage handlers, they're incredibly important. We all know we've all lost a bag at some point. We need them definitely. And flight attendants are super important, and they go through training too. I'm not super familiar with what their schooling process likes, but I have a friend that just went through, and she's a flight attendant for American and absolutely loves her job, loves it. So much travel, the community's great. You get to connect with a lot of cool people. It's amazing. Oh, and
Yeah, and
mechanics. Mechanics,
yeah,
we really essentially need them.
yeah. So
Yeah, they're
if
one of my favorites. So one of my favorite things to do.
yeah,
Oh,
because when the
sorry.
plane's on the
One of my
ground,
favorite things to do throughout flight training is to spend a lot of time in the mechanic shop to learn more about like how does this plane work? How is this put together? Like we have to learn, especially in your private pilot phase, we need to have a pretty good understanding of how this plane is put together. So if there were to be anything to happen in the air, we're able to quickly troubleshoot what kind of issue is this? What does this need addressed specifically? And so I love spending time in there poking around when they take the engines apart and have the planes open up. It's really, really cool.
yeah, and the thing is too is that this field is only going to grow, and there's always a need because even no matter what type of
Yeah.
aviation you get into, you're going to have always the UPS and FedEx, companies like that that are shipping. Dead gummit.
I already got out there.
All right, I'm sorry about this connection issue we're having. But what I was saying was,
That's okay.
when it comes to aviation, no matter what area you go into, there's always going to be a need for this field to grow because you have the UPS, the FedEx, the Postal Service.
Hmm.
You're going to have
Yeah.
private charter companies. You're going to have obviously the big commercial airlines. So there's always going to be a need to move people and to move items across literally the planet, whether it's a short haul or a long haul.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Now, obviously, one of the main reasons I have you as a guest is because I've flown maybe 30, 35 times in my life. I only remember in ever one female pilot, and I do not remember a single black pilot. So why is there, this was
I
really
believe it.
one of the last fields that really has had a diversity issue. Obviously, like we said, with the Sisters of the Skies, people like Captain Stephanie Grant and people like that are trying to break barriers, but there's still
Yeah.
such a glass ceiling when it comes to females, period, and then especially black
Hmm.
females that are getting in are becoming pilots. So, talk a little bit about that because it is such a big deal for the such a great field to have a lack of diversity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really the biggest thing, and I even think about that too, is I've flown commercially. I've seen a female pilot maybe twice. And like you said, I've never seen a black female pilot before that I personally encountered on an airline. And so I think the biggest thing that is not just the reason that there aren't a lot of just black people in general and then black females specifically, and also the reason that we're not seeing it growing as quickly in that demographic is this is very much a legacy job. This is the kind
Yeah,
of thing that like people do it because their dad did and their grandpa did it, and people go their entire lives and have never even flown on a commercial airline before. Like this isn't a job that's in front of people as an option. And if you don't know someone in the industry, it's very uncommon. So without that exposure, without people being told like, hey, this is an option for everybody, or even if you go to an airline and only see white men doing it, you wouldn't think, oh, I could probably do that too. There's, I feel like a sense of like a natural disqualification when you don't see people like you represented in that field. It would be harder for you to look at that and say, I can probably do that. And so I think it's really important people like Sisters of the Skies. There's so many different organizations that are trying to increase that exposure for especially young black kids too. It's like, hey, you can do different things. Like, yes, there are the jobs that are in front of you. There's also this other thing that you may not have even considered that is very much available to you, and you're not disqualified from that just because you don't have family in the area already.
yeah, and it's also it's one of the big things in the past, and it still is that because of the price of pilot training, it's really priced a lot of communities that don't have the resources out of the market, and that's where organizations like Sisters of the Skies come in to provide scholarships to
Yeah.
help people that want to get into the field. Um, now, before I get to the students' questions, and I got some great ones,
Yeah.
talk about what your ultimate goal is, because we have talked about this. What you want to do when you do complete, because you are getting close to completing
Mm-hmm.
everything. You've been out there in Colorado. I know you're in the St. Louis area now, but you've been out at ATP Flight School out in the Denver area, flying
Mm-hmm.
all over the dang country. You've been eight what was it 8 states in 8 days.
Yeah.
You've been doing some cool stuff.
Yep.
So what is your ultimate career goal when it comes to all this? Because you're not much older than these kids I have here now.
Yeah. Yeah. So my goal has it's to fly corporate or fly for a charter service, which is a pretty abnormal thing for someone to want to do specifically. Most people do sometimes, but for me, I love the corporate and charter service aspect because it's so much more personal with the clients. You could have the same people coming in week to week, month to month that get to know you, know your name, you get to know their lives, their stories. And I love connecting with people and getting to know them. So I was just really drawn to the personal aspect of that. Also, they fly some really cool jets and go some really amazing places. So that is what I'm working towards.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing too. You know, you want to do something different. You know, a lot of young people tell me, well, my mom did
Mhm.
this, you know, my granddad did this, and it's like you said, you know, they don't understand that not only is there a push for this, there's a need for this. Um, and and honestly, you know, aviation to me is one of the
Mhm.
coolest fields because, like you said, what other job do you really get paid to travel? I mean, obviously, you don't get the vacation everywhere you go, but you get to just check off a map of getting to go to so many cool places. Even if you're flying for
Yeah.
FedEx, you know FedEx ships all over the planet. You literally get to go all over the world, so it really does provide great opportunity. And then even if you don't want to fly, you
Mhm.
can make a great living
Yeah.
by fixing these cool machines that are always going to get more advanced and always have to be more powerful and more fast to get things places. So it really is a career that is not. It's a field that's not going
Yeah.
away, and it's only going to need more and more people that are willing to learn and get involved. And it can't just be one type of people that are in this field.
Mhm. Right. Right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, I do have some questions from the students, and some of these are really good. And these are pretty much all ninth graders. Um, hold on one second. All right. So this first one is Marquise Newell, and he asked, "What was the biggest motivation for you to get your pilot license?"
So really random. When I was 10, I was on school to do that. And so that's even touching back on the exposure thing. Like, had I not read that book, out of all the books I could have read, had I not read that book and that career just stuck out to me, like, I didn't know this was a thing, I wouldn't be here. And so that really just speaks to like getting this job in front of people in any way. I was just reading a book for fun. But yeah, it's super random. Like that's how I came into contact with it. And my dad was in the Air Force,
Cool.
and so being around the planes then too, it's like, oh my gosh, like I just want to be up there. So yeah, that just I got the bug then and just kept running with it.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think that's important. You know, even if whatever field you want to get into, you know, find out what you can about it. Don't just assume things that maybe you don't know. You know, and that's why I bring in different people to to let these kids
Yeah.
know that some of the stuff may be available you may not know about. So, you know, do some research, find something you love. You don't have to do something just because your family did something or because
Yeah.
or it doesn't,
Mhm.
the world has changed since the 1960s. There's way more opportunities now. And these companies want to be more diverse. So getting out there and getting your name out there
Yeah.
and learning the skills can only be positive for you. This is Jakeithia Brown, and she asked, "What is your favorite part of flying?"
Basically, one of my favorites is flying through clouds. So last week I was flying all over the US and I was flying from Atlanta to Little Rock and we were kind of going around a storm a little bit and that's it. And it was just like more on the other side. And it's it's just the best experience ever. They're so bright and big and beautiful. But I think one of my favorite things for a more personal and overwhelmed with my life just in general, and then also flying and going through school is a lot and it can be stressful. I love getting up there and looking down. It's like we're all so small. Like, yes, our
Wow.
lives are important and valuable, but at the end of the day, I'm not the end all be all. Like, I don't have to freak out. Like, it just really helps me to put things back into perspective. Like, I'm so small, and that is so encouraging to me.
Yeah, and that really is, and that's one thing. I haven't flown a whole lot of my life, but that's one thing I always like too. I was like, we're up here, and the world just looks so small, and it just gives you such a great perspective.
Yeah.
All right, this is Micaiah Luckett, and she asked, "What do you do when the autopilot is on?"
I like that question. So usually, I like to monitor. So we'll just watch, make sure. So like you set your altitude, you set your heading, or if you have like a route programmed into the GPS, you just make sure that it's doing its job, but honestly, there's really not a lot to do. Sometimes we disable the autopilot every now and then and just hand fly it for fun because we're bored. But yeah, there's some people that like study while the autopilot's on, or they're listening to music,
Wow.
or just chatting with your co-pilot. It can get a little boring sometimes, but yeah, good question.
Wow. Now, along the same lines, this is TJ Jones, and he asked, when you're flying the plane, do you ever take a nap for a certain amount of time?
Been doing really long flights recently, and so with my co-pilot, we were flying from Atlanta to Tampa, and it was long, and it was the middle of the night, and I was exhausted, and I was like, I need you to take controls for like 30 minutes so I can go to sleep. So we do like nap back and forth sometimes. For some flights, we don't need to, but for the long ones, and we landed at like 3 in the morning, so we were tired. So we would go back and forth and take a quick power nap. But yeah,
Well, and that's also I hadn't brought this up. I'm glad you mentioned that because this is one of those jobs too where, the hours are they can be crazy depending on weather, depending on delays at airports, depending on in a corporate setting, somebody running late. But you got to stay on deadlines, but you also have to pay attention to other obstacles. So you may be getting in at 3 and 4 in the morning. Obviously, you will get a chance to sleep when you get there, but you really have to be flexible when it comes to hours.
yeah, absolutely. It's a very fluid industry, the travel industry in general. And they tell us from day one in school, you have to be flexible if you want to make it. Because yes, plans and schedules and outlines are very important. And as a business, like you need to stick to them. At the same time, if you're not flexible, you're going to end up forcing something to happen when it probably shouldn't. We have one of like the hazardous attitudes is called get there itis. You ignore other factors. It's like we should probably delay this flight for a little bit, or let's wait for the weather to clear up instead of trying to fly through a storm. You have to be very flexible and very fluid.
Awesome. All right, this is Mariah Harris, and she asked, "What are some things that you didn't expect or thought was different before you got into this career?"
I like that question. Didn't expect. I think one of the biggest things is I didn't understand how much I needed to know mechanically. There's a lot. Like we have to study basically all of the systems, not to the extent of being a mechanic, but we need to know a lot. And that just wasn't something I was expecting to know. And I was information that is not the way my brain works. And actually now it's one of my favorite things to study. I love getting to know it. And the more a pilot you become, because when you feel something in the controls or you experience like a gauge going out, you know what's happening. And it also keeps you from freaking out about stuff that if you didn't understand what was going on, you would think it was a bigger deal than it was. So that's something that I had no clue I needed to know going into it, but I'm really grateful that I know it now.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, because even flight attendants when I've flown, I'll feel some bump, and I'm like, "Whoa!" And they're like, "Oh no, it's fine." So I'm like, "Oh, okay. If the person that works for the airline can tell me that, I
Yeah.
guess it's okay." So, that's a great point because everybody on the plane
Yeah.
is a lot more familiar. Even and flight attendants at least have some mechanical knowledge as well, and they can relay said, "Oh no, that happens all the time. We're good." So it really is good
Mm-hmm.
from a customer standpoint as well to if somebody's asking what's going on, you can tell them. I just got one. I just got one more student, and he's got a couple of questions. This
Absolutely.
is Javion Fields, and this is two good ones here. He asked, "What are the biggest obstacles you have faced being a black female in this field?"
Great question. Um, I think one of the things that I encounter, not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but always having people assume that I'm a diversity hire or I'm just here to make a company look good. And it frustrates me sometimes. It's like, I'm just as qualified as the rest of you guys. A lot of people that look down on me, it's like, I have more licenses than you do. What are you talking about? So it's hard, and at the same time, I try to be very intentional. I tend to see a dangerous mindset in which is valid But what can become a dangerous mindset in, I think, Black people and then Black females too, is when you walk into a room with something to prove, it can make you a little bit abrasive depending on the way that you carry that. So for me, the way I like to conduct myself is I will let my skills and my talent and my knowledge and my experience speak for themselves. And I'm not here to prove to you that I deserve to be here. The fact that I am here means that I do. And so I think for me, that's just one thing that people will make comments. Like I've had someone tell me it was a white man, and he told me, he's like, "Oh, you'll probably get a job before me just because you're a Black girl." And I was like, if I get a job before you, it's because I was more qualified than you. And I didn't say that, but just like things that people just say to my face, it's like, you would not say this to anybody else. Like you would see someone else walk in and assume they weren't qualified. And so for me, like I said, I let your experience and your knowledge speak for itself. Like when people walk in with big egos and something to prove, it can tend to be off-putting. And so I'm like, hey, I deserve to be here. And I don't need you to believe that because you're not my boss. So it's challenging and it's frustrating, like always having people doubting why you're in the room with them. But just let your experience and your knowledge speak for itself.
Yeah, and I think that'd be true in a lot of fields that have become more diverse over the years. But that's a great attitude, and I always say the same thing: is if you know that you are qualified to be there, your talent will show. If you put forth the effort, it will show.
Yeah.
And I always say it's not fair and it's not right that people have negative stereotypes of certain groups, but we all know it's true. So it's something that you have to have the mindset for ahead of time and say, look,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to tell yourself, I'm qualified to be here. I put in the work. I
Yeah.
can do it. Now, his other question is, if another a Black student was interested in becoming a pilot, what advice would you give them?
I think the first thing would be what I just previously mentioned is you don't have anything to prove to people. You don't. You're just as smart, just as capable, just as qualified as anyone else in the room. And don't people can be really ignorant, like you're saying, like there's stereotypes about different types of people and in different fields. And it's not my job to prove you wrong. Um, what I do may prove me. I'm here because I wanted to become a pilot, and that's what I'm going to do. Stay focused on who you are as an individual, and then why are you here? What motivates you? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Any challenge anyone has against you is going to have a much greater impact than I know who I am and I know why I'm here and I'm gonna do it. And I don't really
That's
care
all.
what you have to say about it. So I think just going in, like, there's a thick skin that we have to develop without becoming calloused and rude and mean about it. Like, my favorite way to come back with an insult is like being nice because they don't expect it. We come back on my performance and I'll get back to you later. I don't have to prove anything to anybody and you don't either. So there's a thick skin that you need to develop without becoming, like I said, without being callous. No one can take that from you.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, and we thank you as always for joining us. And it's just such a cool field that you've gotten into, and you're just such an inspiration to so many young people. Because, like I said, you're not much older than these kids, and you're already
Mm-hmm.
very close to living out a great career that is in desperate need of more diversity. But before we go, why should these kids, whether they're male, female, Black, white, whatever, why should they really consider getting into aviation? Because, like we said, it is super cool, and here in Mississippi we have college programs that can offset some of those costs that you would incur.
Yeah.
You can get a scholarship like anything else and save a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are lots of scholarships available, lots, 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 and so many different organizations to join. I think one of the biggest things, even outside of flying, is the aviation community is very, very small, and that's what's so beautiful about it is getting to connect with other people, making friends in different states, different countries. It's beautiful, but then also like even for me being here, like you could be me for someone else. It's like, hey, this job has never been presented to you before, but you can do this, like makes the world feel so much smaller. Like last week, I went to 8 states in 4 days and was all over the place and meeting people. And there's just so much more that you have access to in this field, and it is so beautiful. Why would you not want to see more of it? And again, I've never been a homebody before, so I love traveling. I always want to get out. So I know it's not for everybody. And this field is time. It just opens up so much to you, getting to see more of the world, getting to interact with different people, different cultures, refining your skills. Yeah, it's amazing. I can't speak highly enough about it.
And your face just lights up. It's just really cool to see how excited you get about it. And it is just, to me, one of the coolest jobs there is. And I'm so glad you took some time for us today. Miracle Maze, all the way from Belleville, Illinois, there in the St. Louis area. We're so thankful for you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. It's good to be back.
All right. Talk to you soon, buddy.
All right.
See ya.